A very good evening to everyone. Before we begin, I would request everyone to keep your audio device on mute mode. However, during the question answer session, you may ask questions through the messaging facility provided in the meeting platform through chat messages. As Bharat Ratna, Dr. Kalam used to say, the purpose of education is to make good human beings with skill and expertise. Enlightened human beings can be created by teachers. With this as a mantra, let me quickly begin the event. Changes in the education policy would act as a catalyst to provide our nation with better students, more efficient professionals, and above all, better human beings. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of IIM Ranchi, I welcome you all in today's webinar on the topic, National Education Policy, a Paradigm Shift, organized under the aegis of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance of IIM Ranchi. We are extremely privileged to have 6 education leaders and eminent academicians as speakers of this webinar. Professor Shailendra Singh, Director IIM Ranchi, Professor Girishwar Misra, former Vice-Chancellor, Mahatma Gandhi Hindi International University, Wardha, Professor Manoj Kumar Tiwari, Director, NITIE Mumbai, and he will be joining with us in another 5 minutes. Professor Bhasker, Director IIM Raipur, Professor Debashish Chatterjee, Director IIM Kozhikode, and Professor Himanshu Rai, Director IIM Indore. I extend a very warm welcome to all our eminent speakers of the evening. Now, I take this opportunity to introduce our passionate team of our faculty members who are involved with the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance. Prof. Aditya Shankar Misra from Marketing Area and Professor Gaurav Manohar Marathe from OBA and HR Area are the co-chairpersons of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance. Professor Anshuman Hazarika from General Management Area, Ethics and Business Law, and Professor Sakshi from the area of Economics are the members of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center of Leadership Policy and Governance. Now, I would request Professor Aditya Shankar Misra to give us a brief overview of the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Swati. Good evening, honorable speakers and participants. This is Dr. Aditya Misra, faculty member and co-chair at Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance. I feel privileged to introduce ABVCLPG, a Center for Excellence under the aegis of IIM Ranchi to you. The center was established 2 years back in the name of India's visionary and popular former Prime Minister, late Sri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. Since then, under the guidance of our Honorable Director, sir, the center is working in the lines of Atalji's vision for a developed and prosperous India. The center aspires to be a renowned think tank, nurturing policy professionals and leaders through research on leadership strategies, policy skills, and governance mechanisms. We aim to conduct research and programs to train our stakeholders in leadership skills, policy expertise, and intricacies of governance. We collaborate with various government, non-government, and corporate entities to conduct meaningful research and affect not only corporate governance, but political governance too. Simultaneously, the center disseminates the knowledge to the relevant audience by organizing seminars, roundtables, workshops, and in today's times, webinars and symposiums. And we feel pride in saying that many senior administrators, entrepreneurs, academicians, senior managers, and leaders have graced the events organized by the center. Honorable Vice President of India, Sri Venkaiah Naidu ji, and Union Minister Retired General Sri V.K. Singh ji are 2 of such names. In the end, I, on behalf of Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance, would like to thank you for providing your consent to address the webinar audience on the topic of National Education Policy 2020. I look forward to hear and learn from you, honorable speakers, and I'm sure that today's webinar is going to be another feather in the center's cap. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. A true leader is a person who inspires you, motivates you, encourages you, and empowers you to be the best you can be. IIM Ranchi is really fortunate to have such a leader as the director of the institute, Professor Shailendra Singh sir. Let me now briefly introduce him to the audience. Prior to his appointment as the director of IIM Ranchi, he was the Dean Research and a senior professor in the area of human resource management at IIM Lucknow. During the year 2013-14, he was the president of National Academy of Psychology India, and in the year 2018, he has been elected as a fellow of National Academy of Psychology India. He has published 5 books and more than 80 research papers in various reputed national and international journals. He has a rich experience of more than 30 years in the field of research and teaching. Currently, he is giving his contribution as a member of the Board of Governance in various professional bodies and institutes. He also has a vast and varied experience in training, administration, and consultancy. Now, I invite Professor Shailendra Singh, Director IIM Ranchi, to kindly introduce our speakers and also to moderate the session. Over to you, sir.
Sir, please enable your audio, sir.
Thank you, Swati. I feel privileged to present and host a galaxy of learned speakers. I will start with Professor Girishwar Misra. Let me first say that he has been the mentor throughout my career, a great psychologist by training. Alumnus of Gorakhpur University, he started his career from Gorakhpur University as a lecturer in psychology, and we met at Allahabad where he taught me psychology, and he moved to Bhopal University as a founder head and professor of psychology. In 1993, he moved to Delhi University as a professor of psychology, and he served till his retirement at that place. He also served as a Vice-Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi Hindi International University, Wardha in Maharashtra. Professor Misra has written numerous research papers and mentored numerous research scholars. I will not be able to name and count each of them, but 2 ICSSR surveys, 5th survey and 6th survey of psychology, which is considered prestigious benchmark contribution in the field of research, has been edited by him. The 6th volume, 6th issue was having 5 volumes published by Oxford University Press. He has been the editor of a very prestigious journal of National Academy of Psychology called Psychological Studies for more than 15 years, and he still edits the special issues of that journal. Professor Misra, we welcome you at this webinar. Next, I would like to state that people present here are old network of IIM, old wise network of IIM Lucknow. We all, Professor Himanshu, Professor Debashish, Professor Bharat, Bhasker, and myself share the alma mater IIM Lucknow and still hold our professorial responsibility there. About Professor Bhasker, he's a great professor. has done his engineering from Roorkee University, now called IIT Roorkee, and PhD from Virginia Tech, and has served at NASA before joining IIM Lucknow. IIM Lucknow more than 2 decades of experience, including Dean Research and Planning, plus he was editor of Metamorphosis, chief editor of Metamorphosis, with whom I also worked as editor, and was acting director of IIM Lucknow in 2015. He works in the area of information technology, and his book called Electronic Commerce, Framework, Technologies and Application, published by McGraw-Hill, has been considered a world-class book and being used globally as one of the texts. He has been awarded as a best director of business school in 12th annual conference of Indian subcontinent decision science institute in December 2018. Professor Bhasker, we welcome you to the webinar. Professor Debashish Chatterjee has been my colleague since my entry in IIM Lucknow. We shared a course called Behavior in Organization together, and Leadership Discovery, another course. And he has been alumnus of JNU and Pune University for his PhD, and has got pre-doctoral and post-doctoral Fulbright fellowship at Harvard University. Has been a great teacher and great writer, has published 17 books, and has taught at Harvard, IIM Lucknow, IIM Calcutta, and has also served as a dean of SP Jain Singapore chapter before taking as a director of IIM Kozhikode, and he's serving second term at IIM Kozhikode as a director. Professor Himanshu, one of the youngest directors of IIMs, and accredited with 3 feathers, which are considered very prized feather in international accreditation stream, that is AACSB, AMBA, and ICWIS. Professor Himanshu Rai is a very popular teacher in the area of negotiation and human resource management, and very popular at social media. Must be around 30,000 followers behind him. And we again shared many of the courses and had been collaborator in many of research projects, and we have co-authored many research papers together. Professor Tiwari, who has not joined, he had a board meeting today, so he may be stuck there, but he will be joining, I have been told. Professor Tiwari is again a very achieved researcher. As far as his numbers are concerned, he has published 317 research papers. And according to Taylor and Francis assessment, he is the #1 researcher in his own area, operations management in the world. And he has been awarded with many prizes, to name few. He has been placed 14th position in the world for 20 most productive authors in 5 leading POM journals. 9th position in world's top 10 most production journal authors, and has been given #1 that I have already told. He is a alumnus of VIT, and before joining NITIE, he had been with IIT Kharagpur and as a Dean Planning as well as a Professor of Industrial Engineering. Now we will start our webinar discussion and we'll take a round table mode, and first go we will be spending 5 to 7 minutes each on what it takes to go for completing the vision of new education policy. Let me just read out what is the vision of new education, National Education Policy 2020. An education system rooted in India's ethos that contributes directly to transforming India, that is Bharat, suitably into equitable, vibrant knowledge society by providing high quality education to all, and thereby making India a global knowledge superpower. Second, the curriculum and pedagogy of our institution must develop a deep sense of respect towards the fundamental duties and constitutional values, bonding with one's country, and a conscious awareness of one's role and responsibility in changing world. To instill a deep-rooted pride in being Indian, not only in thought, but also in spirit, intellect, and deed, as well as to develop knowledge, skills, values, and dispositions that support responsible commitment to human rights, sustainable development and living, and global well-being, thereby reflecting a truly global citizen. See, this is the vision, what we want to achieve. But let me just say what has been depicted in this policy itself, that how we are and our system, universities and colleges are suffering. So first point is given, a severely fragmented higher education ecosystem. Less emphasis on development of cognitive skills and learning outcomes, more on rote memory and omitting whatever you have remembered. A rigid separation of disciplines with early specialization and streaming of students into narrow areas of study, limited access to, particularly in socio-economically disadvantaged areas, with few higher education institutions that teach in local languages, limited teachers and institutional autonomy, inadequate mechanism for merit-based career management, and progression of faculty and institutional leaders, lesser emphasis on research and at most universities and colleges, and lack of competitive and peer-reviewed research funding across disciplines, suboptimal governance and leadership in HEIs, that is higher education institutions, and ineffective regulatory mechanism, large affiliating universities resulting in low standard of undergraduate education. So vision is very laudable, but when we have this kind of system, what will it take to reach to our vision? It starts with Professor Himanshu Rai. Professor Manoj Tiwari, namaskar. We have already used you in your absence.
Namaskar, namaskar.
Professor Himanshu Rai.
All right. Thank you very much for those very kind words and for delineating the vision statement as well as the problems that we face. I'm going to talk about three things very, very quickly, which I find as the strengths of the NEP 2020, as well as the challenges which we will face when we are actually trying to implement, and some possible solutions. The first thing that really excited me about the NEP 2020 is the multidisciplinary education and focus on the multidisciplinary education. And the important part is that the NEP 2020 talks about this multidisciplinary education even at the higher education level. Now, this is something where we at IIM Indore have a personal experience with. So as many of you might know, we have this program called the Integrated Program in Management, which is at the undergraduate level. And at the undergraduate level, what we experimented with was that instead of having a typical BBA course, we have something called the BA in Foundations of Management. And this course is built on the strengths of philosophy, political science, economics, statistics, literature, music, and theater. And what we see, because the results are here for us to see, this course was started in 2011, and therefore the first batch graduated in 2016. We have 5 batches who have graduated so far, and what we see is very, very heartening, that there is an all-round development of the students who come out of this particular course. And therefore, I think that the focus being on the multidisciplinary education is going to be very, very interesting. The challenge that lies over here is that there is always some kind of a silo which is built in. So most of the higher education institutions, they work in silos. So even within the areas, within the functions, there's very limited interaction. And breaking these silos is going to be a big challenge because it requires participation of everybody. And more importantly, considering that higher educational institutes are fairly independent, as all of the directors here would know, as I keep telling in all the fora, that in an educational institution such as an IIM, only the director can be fired. Nobody else can be fired. And therefore, everybody has got this very strong sense of independence, and to be able to persuade all of the faculty to come out of their silos and engage both in multidisciplinary research and thereby build a multidisciplinary kind of an ecosystem. That is going to be a challenge. But I think with persuasion and by actually demonstrating the results that look at the students who come out of this kind of system, that is going to be very, very useful. The second thing which excited me a lot was this entire concept of the academic bank of credit, which means that if at all you're doing something and if you realize that, hey, this is not what I want to do, I want to take a break, I want to go do something else, then the years that you have put in this particular field of education are not going to go waste. Now, why I was excited by this is purely because of the socio-economic reasons. You see, I can speak for me, and I know that many of the people amongst my friends, at least, we went into engineering not because we wanted to become an engineer. We went to engineering because my father wanted me to become an engineer. And I was given only 2 choices, either join engineering or join medicine. And because I did not like biology and I loved physics and maths, I went into engineering. Subsequently, after working for 8.5 years with Tata Steel, I realized that I loved talking to human beings more than I loved talking to electrical machines. And that's when I changed. But even if that realization had happened, let's say, in the middle of my engineering course after, say, 2 years or 3 years, I couldn't have left it, because had I wanted to come back to it, I would have had to start at the bottom again, which means right from the first year. So now this academic bank of credit gives me that option that if I realize in the middle of a long 4 or 5 year course that, look, this is not what I want to do, I go out, I do something else, I always have the option of coming back and I will get some credit. Of course, learning never goes waste. So learning wouldn't have gone waste, but now at least there would also be a certificate which would allow me to continue from wherever I left. The challenge that I see over here is the expiry date. So the kind of a world that we are living in, things are changing so fast. So whether this pandemic had happened or not, we were inexorably moving towards a post-4th industrial revolution. And post-4th industrial revolution, the kind of skill sets which would be required are going to be very different from the kind of skill sets which are required today. And the obsolescence rate is also going to be very high. So how are we going to determine the obsolescence rate of this academic bank of credit? I mean, we put the money in there in terms of our education. How long will this education be? So there, I think the solution is that we all sit together, and once again, people from multiple disciplines, and then we come up to a consensus saying that this is what the expiry date of a particular education is. For example, in our MBA institutions, we say that 5 to 7 years is what a good MBA degree is for. And after that, you need to update your skills. So this is the second point. The third and the final point is the autonomy. Now, I was very happy when I saw that the NAP 2020 talks about autonomy to the higher educational institutions, particularly the good institutions such as, say, the IIMs and the IITs. Then lies the challenge once again, because just as I said that there is this tendency in academia to actually stick to what we think is the best. Likewise, there's a tendency, if not in the government, then in the government agencies, to hold on. So there are going to be many a distance between the cup and the lip. So whether the autonomy which is there on the paper actually gets implemented and is actually given even in spirit to the institutions of higher education is something that needs to be seen. And I think here the solution is that we ensure that we regulate ourselves so well, the institutions of higher education, that there is no need for any outside party to come and regulate us. So these three, according to me, are some of the wonderful things. Built in it are the challenges, and built in it are the solutions. Back to you, Professor Singh.
Good, good. Thank you. Professor Debashish Chatterjee. Professor Debashish Chatterjee.
I don't know what this is. I thank you, Shailendra, for considering me for this panel of very erudite scholars. Yeah, so the thing is that in the spirit of IIM Lucknow, I would differ slightly from Himanshu's point of view. We are very good in differing with each other, but we remain friends nevertheless. For me, the idea of multidisciplinarity is very powerful, and there is no doubt that multidisciplinarity is a norm. But for me, the journey of multidisciplinarity started long back, even before the policy was conceived. And I had the privilege, Shailendra, in his euphoria of putting the best things about me forward, forgot that my management lessons started with a professor called S.K. Chakravarti in IIM Calcutta. And he started a Center for Human Values in Management, which was a pioneering effort in that time. And I was lucky to be part of the pioneering movement in IIM Calcutta, where we had Vedanta and Upanishads impacting the world of modern management. So I have a recall that, I went to with Professor Chakravarti to meet Mr. Ratan Tata and said, we are trying to implement lessons from Vedanta in management. Would you consider giving us a donation? Because we don't want to accept money from any foreign institution. We don't want to accept money from organizations that are perceived to be corrupt. So Tatas are our only hope. Can you do something? So 60 lakhs came across the table that paid for my salary as ACC Research Fellow in IIM Calcutta. And I survived 3 years in that hot milieu of IIM Calcutta, where there was a great resistance to that center, but there was a great excitement of building something very entrepreneurial in the IIM system. I'm eternally grateful to S.K. Chakravarti for giving me that platform. The idea of the center was transdisciplinarity, not multidisciplinarity. The idea of multidisciplinarity assumes that all disciplines stay rooted in their own boxes, and then they meet as and when they choose to. But the Upanishadic literature start ending with Vedanta, which means end of all knowledge. The Vedanta doesn't mean that knowledge has ended. It simply means that when all this quest for disciplinary or worldly knowledge ends, there's something else that begins, and that is the quest for who is the learner. And I think for me, that would be the crux of the entire shift in the education policy. If we were to look at globalizing Indian values, Indian thought system and knowledge system, which the policy very emphatically states, we have to look at what India has to offer to the world on its own strength, rather than just pick and choose from here and there. I have a sense that if you look at Nalanda, India's first real global effort at setting up a university system, the way Nalanda was set up was essentially around the spiritual order, and the king would give money to the university and take his hands off. And so the university administration was run by people who were monks who knew the system, and so there was a complete autonomy given to the teachers to decide the course of how the resources will flow. So I think the very conception of a global standard Indian institution, IIMs already are. The fact that we have not recognized as one is a matter of details. I don't want to go into that, but I cannot imagine that IIMs are not global institutions. IIM Kozhikode has surfaced in QS rankings this year, and without much of an effort, we were into the top 15 plus for our EMBA program, alongside ISB Hyderabad at 101 plus in the world. And I'm sure that given our sort of standing as a collective, all other IIMs will legitimately aspire to be in the global league. It's a matter of a few years here and there. So that's not the point. The point is that what are we bringing to the world table? And the policy is stating that only as a design principle. It is not stating that as something that we ought to do, and rightly so, because policy is not meant to tell you what to do. Policy is meant to nudge you in the direction of what is ideally done. And I'm sure that the policy is going to play out in the next 20 odd years, if not more. So my first take is that from multidisciplinarity, we have to look at transdisciplinary education, which means a meta-discipline which India can showcase before the world. You see, what sold in Nalanda was not just Indian knowledge of the material sciences. What sold is India's extraordinary ability to present to the world a vision of the world, a vision of a human being, which was unknown in the Western world. And I think our best hope is still to go back to those classical Indian thought systems. And I had a conversation with the Dalai Lama last week, and he said if Indians understood the value of their own classical and ancient wisdom and did the least to preserve them, if not, to promote them, that would be a great step forward. And I think going back is not necessarily going back, it is going forward with the kind of richness that we bring to the table. And I think that would be our best hope. And from transdisciplinarity, we would move into the globalization bit. IIM Kozhikode adopted globalizing Indian thought. You can see right behind me that sentence. And it states very clearly that there is something about Indian thought that is worthy of global attention. If you look at today, the word globalization is synonymous with Western hold the Western ideas on the world. Now today, 1 out of every 6 person in the world comes from either Western Europe or North America. By 2047, when independent India becomes 100 years old, and IIM Kozhikode becomes 50 years old, I'm pretty certain that the number of Indians representing the world will be 1 out of 5, and only 1 out of 10 will be a Western human being. It will be unfair, I think, for the Western world to carry the burden of globalization, at least in the realm of ideas. India should have a shot at it. And I think in that direction, IIM Kozhikode has conceptualized, way before the policy is articulated, that there is hope for Indian thought, given the kind of talent we have in this country. So for us, globalization means globalization of ideas, globalization of knowledge systems, thought systems, which have come to be honored in this country for a long time. And thirdly, the issue of autonomy, which Himanshu touched upon. I personally think that even without the legislation, IIMs were fairly autonomous institutions. We didn't have to ask for autonomy from anybody. My second term in IIM tells me that there was as much autonomy before as there is today. The question of autonomy is not a piece of legislation. The question of autonomy starts with excellence. I don't think any control system tampers with an excellent institutions. IITs, IIMs, NITIEs, and several universities have demonstrated that by virtue of their excellence, they can earn the right to be autonomous as an institution. At its best, autonomy is a craving for designing your own course of action and influencing others in the process. At its worst, it's a tussle for power. I don't think we should gravitate towards the second concern. I don't think any government worth its salt will interfere with the system that's functioning well, and IIMs have done remarkably well. I'm not just speaking on behalf of Kozhikode, I'm speaking for everybody else. So what the policy does is set in motion a very, I think an understated strategy, imperative, a policy guideline that shows us that what we have been doing so far is perhaps pretty good. And it gives us a sense of validation. It also provides a sense of direction. Shailendra, I've taken your allotted, so I will rest my tongue.
Thank you, Debashish. So you have highlighted transdisciplinarity and have said that globalizing Indian thought is something that we have started before the policies announced, and autonomy is something that we are already practicing, and so we have been validated by the policy. Thank you, Professor Debashish. Now, Professor Bharat Bhasker. Please unmute yourself.
All right. Thank you, Professor Shailendra Singh and Professor, all my colleagues from IIM Lucknow. Dr. Misra, I also see Professor Tiwari has already joined. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. Although Professor Himanshu and Debashish has very beautifully pointed out the major contours of the policy or the philosophy which is going on behind this new policy. But before I get into that, what I think at higher education, we need to understand why this policy is fundamentally different. This is not the first time we had a change in policy. In independent India, around 1950 or 48 to 50 period, we had an education policy. 1966 to 68 period, we had another education policy. Net result of that was a 10+2 system. Of course, it took more than 10 years to get implemented. And further on, we had an 86 policy, which was based upon creating the scientific temper and ICT integration into the education. Right? We call that as a computer, beginning of the computer era, or absorption of computer in the education system, etc., and so on. But none of those policies brought about a drastic change as is envisioned by this policy, because this policy suddenly derived on a fundamentally sound principle, and that principle is based upon the learning process itself. And that's why you see that unless we understand from school level all the way to higher education level, this policy will remain a policy document. And that's my biggest fear about this policy, that how we are effectively able to communicate this policy to people, whether they are able to understand the essence of the policy. And that's why I'll focus more on essence of the policy, because the fundamental, and I think I have three of my colleagues who are from the HR and OB field, so they will probably know better than me about the cognitive process, right? So if you look at those two dimensions, the all education, all learning has been based upon, on the cognitive process dimension, remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, right? And on the knowledge dimensions, there was a factual, conceptual, procedural, and then there was a metacognitive knowledge. Now, what ideal human being in education system should be sitting at the top of pyramid on the frontier of the knowledge dimension at a metacognitive level. That means from graduating from factual to conceptual to procedural to metacognitive, and on the knowledge frontier, and the cognitive frontier at the create level. Unfortunately, when the Britishers created our policy, and prior to that, I won't get into the Gurukul system and our Vedic system of education, which was actually based upon an open-ended. There was no class one and what you learn A, B, C, D in class one, etc., and so on. It was a different aspect of education altogether. So when you got this structured education, Britishers did a wonderful job of what they really required out of us. What they required was from people, maximum amount of people who knew the facts. So the factual level they imbibed in our education system, and they wanted them to remember. So our whole education system was a, what we call, continue to return to Vidya, or continue to imbibe, remember the facts, narrate those facts whenever required. And that's what the clerical staff for the bureaucracy of the Britishers was required to be at that point of time. And that is why the education system emphasized en masse there. And then upper end, to create those civil services, etc., and so on, they needed some more Indians and some more slightly better educated. So they made them reach the understand level and the conceptual level, which means they can take these facts, summarize those facts. So wonderful report creation for the British masters, or later on the independent India's new masters who were there, we were able to create. And that is why the whole education system till about even 50 and 80s policy remained at that quadrant number 4, rather than reaching that metacognitive, which is far beyond, or create level. We continue to, groom our people where they're wonderful understanding and conceptual framework oriented. That is the only level we groom them up to. Now, some of the better institutes, which are actually the leading lights like IIM, IIT, which came independently in the New India, were collaborated by various other education systems, were able to put the education system at a slightly different level, and that is why they are shining examples. Even though the original education may not have continued, or up to 12th they did not have had the same kind of education, but later on, these people at least tried creating the apply and procedural ability in people. So they took them beyond conceptual to the procedural level. So IIT engineers are wonderful in creating those procedural, understanding the machinery, designing the existing machineries, etc. and so on, operating those machineries. So whatever has been done, they can do it good, well, efficient and wonderful fashion. They can analyze if something goes wrong, and that's why we became a top Y2K debuggers of the world. When Y2K problem came, because we were the biggest analyzers, biggest procedural people, and we were immediately able to conceptualize that and get into that and dominate the world, but not creating new software. Later on we have become, but you'll see most of the create aspect came. Those of Indians who had an opportunity, and many of those IIT and IIM products themselves, or NITIEs and RECs of that time, got into that US or that other oriented education. Many times, little less Japanese education system, but mostly in US education system, where they were able to get those other abilities developed. Now, fundamental fact remains that these people still excelled despite being grounded through in their 10+2 system, where their creativity was killed. Because it is also said that till about 6 years of age, you are 98% of very creative. Young children are very creative. Till you load them with remember and fact, and concept and summarization of data. Up to that, you're killing their creativity, not allowing it to flourish. And that's why you see the new education policy addresses it differently. First 3 years, there's no remember the fact. They go to a play school, do the creation, which is actually, I would say, is not very innovative. Most of the Western, meaning that US education system, Japanese education system in the early stages is of the similar nature. German education system is highly creative in nature, meaning that they don't have this kind of a structure which exists and so on. So that's the biggest and fundamental change which is happening in the education system, which we need to understand. And then if we have understood, then we can lay out what we call the multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. But unless you create that base at 10+2 or whatever the early stage, will not be able to create great higher educational institute. The second part I'll touch upon for a few minutes or a couple of minutes on the higher education system. When we talk about whatever terminology we may like to use, when you enter an education system, as Himanshu said that we became an engineer because he was forced to, choice was only 2, which is true with 99% of our generation in life. There were only few options given and you had to choose between 1 or 2 of those. If you were lucky, you had 2 options, otherwise there was 1 option given to you and you have to consider that option alone, right? Going for other education systems, pursuing what your thoughts are, what your great desires are, was never honored by anyone. The current education system emphasizes that when you enter a university system, you have a choice. There's a transdisciplinarity is a higher concept and it needs to be imbibed. Everybody should have a learning should happen transdisciplinary. When I say higher concept, because ultimately physics, maths and chemistry all are one at a transdisciplinary level. A person who has a PhD in physics actually has won a Nobel Prize in chemistry. It's not surprising because at atomic level, chemistry and physics all become one. And when you're working at atomic level, you can earn the Nobel Prize on either side. So that's why I said that I will leave transdisciplinary because it's a greater concept, and if it can be done, but prior to that, you have to give the choice to a young chap or young person to imbibe in him that ability to pursue, yet have a degree, yet have a aspect of livelihood and option to learn along. Depository of courses, etc., being various options, but most important is I may be forced, I may like at early stage and join a bachelor's program in XYZ university, whatever that top university emerges in India at some point of time. But maybe after going there, I like economics or I like psychology. Why shouldn't I be able to carry out my major dimension of education, imbibe that education in psychology? And then if I undergraduate, I should still be allowed to graduate with enough credit courses, etc. and so on. So once I enter the university, rather university saying that you are part of a BA physics, chemistry, BSc physics, chemistry, or BA XYZ subjects, I should be allowed to take a bachelor's degree where I design my own program of study as I go along. I will be then able to become either engineer, maybe a great psychologist for future, maybe a medical professional, maybe whichever other discipline I wanted to pursue. That is what the kind of universities this policy envisages, where a student will be driver learning, because even when you enter after 12th grade, you really don't know what you exactly want. But after studying some subjects, you evolve. So by the time you reach second year, you can have your final program of study. This is the model I will graduate with. And then master's level, I should have a choice. I can build upon something else. I may do psychology, but why shouldn't I be deprived if I have enough background knowledge to do a degree in computer science later on? If it is possible for me to do those background subjects. And that is the great benefit if we are able to understand the policy in entirety or in well form and implement in this form. Now that's a major concern for me. How will we be able to, in Indian context, where we are from that point to this next point, how will we arrive? Those are the challenges. Thank you. We'll discuss later.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Bhasker. 3 points emerges from your presentation. One, that understand the fundamental change in the policy. That is fundamental learning has been focused rather than the achievement through rote memory. And you have also historically explained what is the meaning of cognitive and metacognitive learning, and how Britishers have devised our education system, where they wanted to have people who can just reproduce the factual knowledge. And your point on choice is well appreciated. And you have said, thought that how this can be actually implemented. Well, you have left. Professor Manoj Tiwari,
Yes.
you had been not here. We were having 5 minutes, 7 minutes time for initial note. What is your take on this National Education Policy 2020?
Actually, sir, with due respect, today I was having our board meeting, so I just finished and then came to this program, and I'm so happy to see the galaxy of scholars, particularly those whom I had to meet long time. So thank you very much, Professor Shailendra Singh, for bringing all of them at one place. So really it's great. And now coming to the question that what I believe about and what is my opinion about this policy. So sir, I start with actually Ramcharitmanas one quote, which was mentioned about the kind of education so far we are taking actually. It starts with Vidya bin Vivek upjaye. Vidya bin Vivek upjaye, Shram phal badhe phale bin paye. Means if you create this kind of education and degree without having consciousness, without having ability to reason out the things, then only labor will increase and it is not going to increase anything else in the respect of that. So keeping this in mind, now this education policy has brought very good things. Many of the barriers earlier considered as a strong rules, now they want to melt it out. The multidisciplinary idea, the idea of taking admission and leaving the systems, you cannot go without any certificate. At least first year also you take, you will get one certificate. Similarly, the massive application of technology, which is being touted and mentioned in this document, is most timely contribution they have made. Just imagine this pandemic is how to conduct the exams. Such a problem has the technologically superior institutions, they decided to just give the grade based on up to midterm performance. None of the tools, whatever being existed, were being explored how to conduct then the process of academic things. This particular thing led to anything in mind. Whether our education systems, the kind of degree we are providing is the only final exam, everything, or do we have any process of the evaluation systems? So when it is there, then even if you one exam, you conduct an online basis or with the whole take-home assignment like what most of the US universities used to do, is it not a best practice for conducting exam? So like this, the technology which is being touted and which is being used now, I think that is going to be big achievements mentioned under this particular document. And online education systems, which can create the kind of skill that is needed among the working professionals, those who are aged professionals, even many younger people, even in many universities. Like I tell you a simple example. I wanted to call one very stalwart in logistics and supply chain, Professor Singh, long back ago. I many times contacted some of the industries, they were ready to pay him. But no, he was not ready because he said that 3-4 days time it will take unnecessary to go to India and come back to US. But because of this online platforms, he came and now he's going to launch a course with us in India. So the kind of advantage our professionals can gain by attending this kind of expertise, which would not have been possible by leveraging the technology kind of things in our systems. And remember, the AICT, one of our regulator for the education, what was its image before 2015? Now, due to massive adoption of technology, now most of the documents that you need to be cleared, they are through online. So that resulted in that you can easily get MBA, you can easily get all kind of accreditation by application of all these e-learning things. I also want to say that many other programs the government of India started, which is going to strengthen the concept in NITIE 2020. These are, I think, a scores of the things. If you see NPTEL, I think there is a professor in IT Madras whose lecture on operational research has been maximally referred by the student of any college. If you see the nonlinear programming, integer programming, name the name of Professor Srinivasan, everybody knows him because that is the power of technology. That how one professor was earlier, only those who are attending his course, only they were knowing it. But now, entire country, people are knowing, even not only country, many other countries also, they refer NPTEL lectures of Professor Srinivasan. Similarly, there are many initiatives like how can we have a collaboration with the other country. So the provisions of the Spark, provisions of the other initiatives, they are going to be the things. Also, let us see this the platforms through which we are covering the online courses. I'm using Microsoft Team, I'm using the WebEx, I'm using the Google Team. So now what were they? And I am teaching now 375 students in one class with all programming content. And see, imagine if this technology could have been there earlier, then how many students got benefit out of that? Just imagine. So otherwise for 375 class, I don't think there is a classroom in any university. So idea is that how we can nicely use the new technologies, particularly education technologies, to conduct the examination, to conduct the classes, to impart the knowledge, to learn many courses. And they will be game changer with respect to building the skill set among the people. And also, each one of us have to create the platform for covering all such things in wider details. So hope that with the help of NEP, many of the programs will be launched in collaboration with the international bodies, which will have ramification to our program also. And this kind of thing will force us to become competitive and improve our own delivery systems, so that there will be a lot of fair competition between the degrees, different kind of degree. Even we are offering, like say some degree you can offer in collaboration with the any foreign institution. Some degree you are offering alone. So now among takers there will be choice. Where I want to go, I want to come to the IIM Raipur for a degree given by MBA, or they have a program with say Rotterdam Institute or some program with the UK, and with the help of that they want to share. So now such kind of things are going to be very, very popular within the existing system itself. Even they may also come to you to have collaborations, because they also need proper advance and proper people to have their system. So with this I can say that under the NEP, it's one of the wonderful documents, sir. And we hope that once it is properly implemented, I think there will be a lot of changes we can see in our education system. And perhaps our thought process will entirely be changed. You can go ahead with your other programs. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Manojji. Interesting idea you have thrown, that technology is the best equalizer and technology gives great opportunity. You brought the examples that a class of 375 is being taught, and a person who is a Nobel laureate has been invited, and with the help of technology he can contribute to your institute's program and other programs. So thank you. Professor Misra. Professor Misra.
Thank you, Shailendra, for organizing this wonderful meeting of minds. A number of issues have been raised by my esteemed colleagues. I understand that the new education policy offers a vision for India which tries to transform the entire education system, and it is reflected in the various propositions. It is very clear that it tries to recontextualize the entire process of education from the early learning stage, the ECCE, to the level of post-graduation. There is revamping, a kind of restructuring of the entire process is proposed. And I think for the first time there is recognition that the early development is very important, and there is a proposal to aid pre-primary education in an important way. I also find that instead of considering movement across different stages of learning as a just moving in a blind alley, that you complete high school, then go to, higher secondary, then bachelor, then masters, and then do PhD, it becomes a process where you don't apply your mind and you move forward. Now, a very important change which has been proposed is that there are multiple exit points. That if a person is ready to learn a few skills and wants to leave this system, he is allowed with respect and dignity. So after 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, so there should not be extra load on the system. Let me remind you when India became independent, there were 18 universities. Now we have about 1,000 universities. We have, the number of colleges goes to about 40 lakhs or so. It's a huge system of education, perhaps a very challenging job to organize the entire structure that we have at our disposal. We need help of you people to see how this can be reorganized. It's a very important challenge. Why I am putting this is that there is, particularly after 1990s, high degree of privatization on the one hand, and there is high degree of state interference in the operation of everyday activities in the university system. IIMs, IITs, and similar other institutions are really elite institutions. They have a lot of freedom and autonomy to organize their life and conduct their activities. The promise of NEP 2020 is to provide autonomy to the institutions, and they are going to remove the various epithets, deemed university, this and that. All universities will be universities. So how to maintain that autonomy and how to utilize that autonomy is a problem of operations. I don't want to go into the details about the difficulties which are there. In particular, most of the universities today are suffering from lack of necessary infrastructure. Even the faculty, Delhi University is running for the last several years more than the minimum number of teachers. So it's a pathetic condition. That's the reality. And if you go to state universities, the situation is very bad. So I think how we are going to restructure is a big challenge. How to introduce autonomy and provide freedom to improve the quality of teaching learning is a big challenge. A kind of shift is required in organizing.
Yes, sir.
That there is a system of bureaucratic hassles, I would like to call it. And you have to operate with the help of that and within that system. It's very important to change the mindset of bureaucrats and politicians. They have to learn about the value of education and the processes which are important for successful functioning of universities. It's very important. The university system is embedded in the social context, in the political context. Unless you change that, nothing is going to happen. I have been with this system. I have seen the functioning in state universities, in central university, and I have also worked as Vice-Chancellor of one of the central universities. And I would like to share with you that the kind of system which is in operation is against the functioning of universities. That is the truth. The practices have to be reorganized. The various kinds of hassles which are there, the impediments which are there, they have to be removed. Unless you do that, no qualitative change is going to take place. The points which my colleagues have raised are very important, but they require some minimum level of functioning. The faculty strength which is required is 15, and there are 3 faculty members. How you expect to run the institution or the department? I'm talking the truth, which is relevant in the case of about 90% universities in India. That is the truth. It's a pathetic situation. you need to do complete overhaul of the system. The second point which I would like to bring in, that the connectivity of learning with society, ecology, and culture is very, very important. The term silo was used, and I think my friend Debashish ji, perhaps others, they have drawn attention to the various elements which are required to reroute or to recontextualize our learning and teaching process in our context. Learning for society, for development of the people, to facilitate change which is required in our context. I think this emphasis is very important. I want to emphasize this point, that the significant others in the sphere of learning research has been in the Euro-American context. Our impetus for learning, for research comes from there. There is a term which is used in social sciences, indigenization. Use those Western concepts in a modified form to suit our conditions. We hardly examine our own conditions. We hardly relate to our own conditions. And it's high time to reorient the entire learning. There is a term IKS, Indian Knowledge System. I don't know how far we are going to include and incorporate such learnings. I learned, and I'm happy that there are people who think that S.K. Chakravarti and his initiative to relate to our own values and systems of thinking is important. I think it requires a serious emphasis on such values in our process. Finally, the point which is very important is that a new structure has been proposed with a Higher Education Commission where Prime Minister is going to chair. Then there are 4 sub-systems or functionaries, and they are going to organize. I don't know how such top-heavy system is going to relate to the needs of all these 1,000 universities. It's mind-boggling. I don't know. It's going towards centralization. It's important to intervene in the system, and I would request all of you to think that the kind of condition which is prevailing in India, what kind of a structure is more appropriate? At least we can think and propose that what structure will be relevant. Today, if you want to earn a master's degree, either in social sciences or in sciences in Delhi University, you pay in thousands, and go to another private university and you pay lakhs. Even undergraduate degree, you pay lakhs. And we don't have sufficient opportunities. It's a reflection on the system that we have adopted, that a student with 96% marks in CBSE is not allowed to get that subject for learning at bachelor's level in a degree college. In Delhi, that is the situation. We have created such a system. It's a problem of massive order. The kind of assessment system that we have is emphasizing on marks, on grades, not on learning, not on acquiring skills, not on transformation of the individual. I think here some very important change is required, that assessment should be part of teaching and learning. It should not be a burden. I would like to draw attention to the kind of mental health problems which are occurring because of this. All of us know about the quota syndrome and the deaths which have taken place, and still it has become a challenge for the entire education system. Even high school students, intermediate students, they fail. And I don't know, my friend was saying that engineering or medical, these are the great aspirations. Now that aspiration is reflected in Delhi. You go to the place near Delhi University, a place called Mukherjee Nagar, and more than 50,000 students are there living in small rooms and doing coaching. I want to mention that a parallel system of learning has been institutionalized. That coaching is important if you want to get success, even in admission in IIT or medical or any. What kind of learning is being taking place in our schools? I don't think it is required. I know the system which is operative in United States. What kind of learning is taking place? How it is happening? If we want to change, and if we want to use the word paradigm shift, we need to think about the processes which are taking place within university departments. We have already mentioned, and the NITIE document talks about the various elements of recruitment and promotion. I think it's very, very important that what system is there. It has been mentioned that accounting and accountability and performance-related promotion, etc., will be introduced. But the system which is prevailed, and please remember that last year there was a gazette notification against plagiarism. That indicates the kind of practices or malpractices have been institutionalized. The UGC has asked to have a review of all the PhD theses submitted in the last 10 years. You know, all this has happened because of the apathy, neutrality, and there is no need to do anything about education. So I think there should be a conviction, commitment, and there should be provision for the necessary infrastructure, which is must. It is happening. Professor Shailendra Singh is a product of Delhi, Allahabad University, where he did his master's. Now there are only 3 teachers in that Center of Advanced Studies in Psychology. You can't imagine the kind of deterioration that has taken place because of systemic flaws which have occurred in the whole process systematically. So I think on the part of government, there should be a clear commitment to change the situation, and it requires change in terms of the provisions. We see that 6% of the GDP will be allocated. Let us see it takes place, and that will not be sufficient to meet the requirements. The number of universities which we have is not sufficient. There is a recommendation that we must have more universities, and Tiwari ji was talking about technology, and I am sure that is going to help us to improve the situation, but it is something which is not easily available even today. Everywhere you don't have that accessibility. So access and equity, these are very, very important questions. Similarly, the opportunities which are available across India are not same. Standards are highly variable. The UGC sets the standards, but the universities are free to design their courses. And I have been involved in such course modifications at UGC level, but they have not been accepted by the universities. They run their own courses in their own way. So how wisdom will prevail in the university system is a big challenge. I don't have a clear answer, but my request to you is how to restructure the organization. You need to critically examine the proposed restructuring of the regulatory bodies which have been proposed, whether they are going to help or not, and what is the alternative. That is a challenge before the management people. I will stop here. I will come back again if given the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Sir, kindly enable your audio.
Thank you, Professor Misra. Your presentation has given many pointers for thought. First, that you recognize that it is a game changer, that early development has been recognized at last. Earlier education policies and policy makers have not recognized that. And you have mentioned importance of multiple exit points. That's something appreciable. But you have also mentioned the pain of running an university system, and definitely university is embedded in a political and social context. So whatever is happening socially and politically, that is going to impact. And you have also emphasized that the meritocracy that we talk about, there is a very difficult situation to implement that. You have said that recontextualize the entire education system, and indigenization is also something that we can follow and follow the Indian knowledge system. Plus, you have narrated your pain of observing the pathetic situation in university system, and you said that answer with me, and restructuring of the regulatory system as well as the delivery system has to be seen. And there comes the issue of funding, as you said that 6% of GDP is will not be going to be sufficient for mitigating the problem. I take the second round and ask this because the issue is on issue hinges on two things: how to get quality education at mass scale at lower cost. This is what is the problem that Professor Misra has highlighted, that access and equity is not there. If Professor Tiwari said that technology is a solution through which we can work, but to what extent that technology can reach, because many of the institutions and many of the colleges are not able to hold the exams, and they are saying that their students are not having any connectivity, and for physical examination they have to come to the campus, and that is where. So I would like and take the same route, starting with Professor Himanshu Rai, financing of higher education. To what extent we can depend on the government, and to what extent we have to be in getting the fund from public-private partnership, and to what extent we can invite the private equity in this. And question has also been raised, why we can't make education business as a profitable business, then perhaps the investment may be coming little more than what we are having right now. We start with Professor Himanshu and take the turn and come at the to Professor Misra again. Professor Himanshu Rai.
Yeah. So I'll start with the last statement, which I'm assuming that somebody made that observation that why can't business be looked at, business education be looked at as a business, or why can't education be looked at as business? The whole point is that the very idea of education as a business will militate against the very fundamental principles on which this NEP is based. Because on the one hand, the NEP is talking about a value-based education, and therefore we are putting education on a higher pedestal than merely making people literate. We are trying to give a sense of direction, and that is the difference between education and literacy. And
commercialization.
Right. So therefore, at a very fundamental level. So, for example, personally, I have a problem when people talk about education as a sector or education as a market, when they say education market, so on and so forth. But that's at a philosophical level. But coming to your question, see, there are three things which are extremely important over here. My personal belief is that if you have fantastic teachers, in that case, the infrastructure that you require actually becomes secondary. I mean, if you look at the Gurukul system, if you talk about the Upanishadic theory, which means literally sitting down at the feet of the Guru, you may not have had great infrastructure, but we had great teachers who, through a dialogic form, imparted knowledge, skills, etc. And therefore, what I believe is that the function of the government ought to be to make sure that they create great teachers, that they invest a lot so far as research is concerned, they invest a lot so far as teacher development is concerned, and the 6% GDP, which was being talked about, we have to understand that this 6% GDP has been allocated since God knows when, but we have never been able to spend, none of the governments has actually spent 6% of the GDP. So we haven't even spent what has been allocated. And clearly, therefore, those areas need to be delineated where that 6% of the GDP should go. So my suggestion would be create amazing teachers. Infrastructure can actually be taken care of both by the institutions as well as through private investment. So, for example, the NEP also talks about allowing 100 top institutions of the world to set up campuses in India. I think that's a great step. Many people said that, oh, it may lead to an increase in the cost of education. I don't think so. I think it is going to reduce the cost of education. Number one, it is going to make everyone more competitive and therefore is going to increase the quality. The only word of caution that I've been putting into the minds of the policymakers is that let's ensure that the money which is actually made through this is pumped back into our own education system. So the remittances should stay within the country. The remittances should not go outside. So this is the second important part. And the third important part is that we increasingly need to strengthen the relationship between academia and industry, and thereby make those kind of programs, create those kind of programs, and within the programs courses which are relevant to the industry, and that would obviously encourage the industry to also put in money so far as the furtherance of education is concerned. So with these three things, I think we would be well set on that particular path.
Good. So 6% is not to be spent, and instead should remain in the country and should invite other investment for the education. Thank you. Professor Debashish, how we can fund the underfunded academic institution HEIs?
Well, how we can fund underfunded institutions is simply a function of excellence. The funders don't fund.
That's what.
The thing is that I used to you're talking about internationalization. I'm just going to just throw some light. In Lucknow, I used to see a shop in Hazratganj area. That's world famous in India. It used to sell chicken. World famous in India meant I want to be world famous, but in the context of the geographical boundaries of India. Look at the paradox. By its very definition, universities are supposed to be universal, right? By its very definition, if you look at what's going to happen let's look at 2030. There will be 4.8 billion middle class. And obviously there will be a lot of women. They would have not a lot of money, but huge aspiration for learning. If you consider university purely as a standalone building in a particular geographical location with affiliated colleges, all that nonsense, and then you lose the very nature. I think this is a flaw in the initial conceptualization of what university is supposed to be. They are not territorial. They are not parochial. They are not funded only by local units. So research funding in a Singapore university or a US university comes from all over the world. Yale University was funded by a carpet maker in Chennai. This is an Ivy League school. After 300 years, funding came from India, from an Indian trader. So all I'm saying is that funding is a function of how good you are, great you are. And Ratan Tata would fund Harvard executive education, but not one of the IIMs. Why is that so? Because eventually his money is more visible in that space. So I'm sensing that the flow of funds again will be a function of the prestige, the brand equity. We have to build those brands very carefully. But in terms of internationalization, I think it's a great step. Looking at these dimmed universities, which are doomed universities anyway. We are talking about dreamt universities. Universities that you and I envision are universal in nature. So Himanshu and I, if we start teaching a course together, it should be available to people in 35 different countries, not because both he and I are good looking, but because we have something to offer to the world, which the world needs, and there is a money for it. Finally, what I want to tell you is that educational enterprises are involved in four things. One is creation of knowledge, two is dissemination of knowledge, three is monetization of knowledge, and four is accreditation of knowledge. The problem is institutions are not creating knowledge. They are borrowing, begging, imitating, and therefore, if you borrow, beg, imitate, who's going to fund you? And so the point I'm trying to make is that if the original mandate of the university, which is to create knowledge for universal concerns, if this is what India teaches itself, because India had that knowledge, our universities, our gurukulas, our nalandas were designed for the world, they're just not designed for a local consumption. And so I think we have to go back to the roots of the thought about what education is. Vidya is something that liberates, and so if liberation is the very nature of education, liberating these universities from the structures of bureaucracy, affiliation, or government control, would mean that the leadership of the university system should go back to the teachers, so that there are policies that are politically sound but educationally unsound don't come into place. Universities have become bastions of political order because the teachers have not reclaimed their role as the conveyors, as well as, so it is the teacher who decides what the dakshina would be, what the noises would be, but the control system has moved out of the teacher's hand into people's hands whose only aim is return on investment. A politician will maximize votes. A businessman will maximize its profits. But a learner will maximize, a teacher will maximize learning. And if that is the goal of the university, I think the leadership of these universities should come back to educational leaders rather than somebody else. I'm sorry, I may have digressed on your issue, but that's what I have to say.
So you are saying that funders will fund excellence, and so we will get excellence and we will not be having difficulty for funds. Professor Bhasker, quick 1 minute because we are also.
All right. I have a few things, basically not focusing on the global aspect of it. Simply our policy itself has a solution for funding as well. Three things are going to happen. First and foremost, of course, government has to increase the funding. 6% is far more than sufficient, except if government can spend it. Even today, not more than 2 to 2.5% of GDP is actually really spent. Rest is all in the budget and never gets materialized. So if you can reach 6%, it'll be really a great deal. Second part, which is extremely important, embedded in the policy, is that 50% of these educated people will be vocationally educated. Let us fundamentally understand we need to create vocational people more in country rather than pure thinkers. Everybody becomes a thinker, nation doesn't progress. And that vocational education, if you look at, today you go to Wipro, you go to Infosys, I'm just talking IT industry alone, 20,000 to 30,000 people, each of them hire every year and they train them for 6 to 8 months, 8 hours a day. The amount of salary they pay to them and the trainers, the cost is tremendous. If vocational education and these institutes are able to reach the status where they produce the industry-ready person, you can ask them to pay the charge back to the institute itself. So at the hiring time, you can tell them, you can take my 20 students fully trained rather than you training them, vocationally ready to take the job from tomorrow. So quality has to come from these institutions of this nature. Same is true of the steel industry. Same is true of the automobile industry. 2 years training programs, 1.5 year training programs. They're running their own vocational institutes. All that becomes part of the educational system. These people are, when they come out of the universities, they're fully prepared, and that industry money will get into the institutions. Finally, I would just like to say that yes, a major changeover will happen. Many of the old dilapidated institutes or universities which are thriving on the old reputation and thinking they are great and money should keep coming to us, we will do nothing, should disappear. Destruction is the first element, which our first essential element out of which creation starts. So let them be destroyed. The 40,000 colleges, autonomous colleges, and more than 850 universities. Out of that, maybe 15,000 good universities will appear out of these colleges. You look at the South Korean example. In South Korea, every 2 kilometers you'll find a university. The concept of university is this multidisciplinary college, which produces industry-ready people. Some of them then go to South Korea National University, or a couple of the universities are Korea Advanced Institute of Technology, etc. and so on. So the couple of higher end institute where the knowledge creation and all that great liberating education happens, but rest of them are producing people who are going to be job ready, vocation ready, and that is how you see Korea as a small country is driving the technology of the world, while we being a large country is still dependent on if we can borrow something from Samsung, if Samsung can put a factory here, etc. and so on. So let the destruction happen of many of these institutes, and the newer one, those small colleges appearing from nowhere or out of the existing one who are able to transform and rebuild themselves, the funding is then not going to be an issue because industry is going to fund them if you are going to produce and cut their costs which they are incurring at the input end. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Tiwari. Unmute, sir. Unmute. Please unmute yourself.
Sir, actually, what I want to say that whenever a new normal comes into the foray and in our system, it becomes very difficult to digest, and somehow initial periods are very painful. Like say, I remember we used to listen radio in our village, and I used to listen a lot of songs, and so many people were working in the Murphy radio company, Philips radio company, but those companies hiring at that time 30 to 40,000 people to make radio. They have their job have gone, they have changed themselves. Somebody went to TV manufacturer, somebody went to other man, but nobody cries where those persons have gone, where the radio has gone. Similarly, what Professor Bhasker mentioned and what others have mentioned, among us also, when the new technology is coming up, and when the Professor Misra's lecture will be available on mobile, the way in which he is teaching in his class, if it is listened in my village in Jaunpur, then why I should encourage somebody to go to Gorakhpur and what you call Gaya to learn those things? The idea is that now such a normal is going to establish, and that automatically force the people to know that what you want to learn, let us choose first. And based on that, option will be available, and you can easily exercise the control and you can see the thing. So many of the concepts were 3 faculties, there are 4 faculties there. Virtually, we require only a place where if those who are underprivileged, who cannot have the facility of the mobile, they can go and listen from there on TV or on video or on screen, so that they can learn and appear in the examination there itself. So now these are the concepts which are going to happen and nobody can stop it. And that way, technology will leverage the education for mass scale people in many domains. Even suppose I want to learn psychology, I will register myself with Coursera and some course of both of your Professor Singh and Raisa's course, and I can learn it. Who is going to stop me? You tell me. Similarly, this quota business has not come automatically. It has been forced out of our system only. When I knew my village, there was no course coverage of the physics, and I want to compete for the IIT, JEE, and NITIE exam. Where will I go? Certainly, where somebody will teach. So accordingly, I learned those things by visiting here and there. Now, what happens? What is being taught in quota? If it is available on a academy, and that academy is charging 400 rupees per hour, so anybody just can think and go, and without going to quota, you can learn all these things there itself. So such things are happening now, sir. Slowly and slowly, all these things, quota type of things, will only work creating new knowledge. They will be creating simplified knowledge where less known person can also understand. So no need to criticize them, only encourage them to make good knowledge, very simple knowledge, which even kamjor ladka can also understand. So such things are going to happen, sir. So I think this education policy will be the panacea for India's trouble in education system. And like we have seen, many things have wiped out. So similarly, many of the concepts also, like where the need of degree in a particular area, when you can manage with small certificate. Correct? So when you get a job also in that area, why you are doing PhD and PhD into those fields? So these things are going to happen, sir. And those who want to do PhD, you can do 60 years age also if you have interest. Correct? So hopefully that this will percolate, and we have to see all this thing. I don't know how many years it will take, but certainly, sir, I am telling you this particular policy has all those provisions. And thank you for calling me again on this issue to dwell upon the issue. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, Tiwari, you said that new normal is a painful and things will change and technology is going to help people to teach, and quota, that is providing good coaching. So people are going there. It is also thrown by the system. So if we can produce good teachers locally and provide thing on internet, on academy, then things will be that people will opt for that kind of thing. So we are coming to the situation where answer has come that fund is not that problem, and brick and mortar institutions are not required if a system are there where good teachers are available. They can produce and help people, and less number of teachers across the country can tap if their resources are good. But I would like to have Professor Misra's final view on this. Where should we go from here? Since we are also running out of time, so Professor Misra's last word, then we will summarize. Professor Misra.
Thank you, Shailendra. I find very clear perspective that education is liberating. On the other hand, many of us think that, I'm sorry if it disturbs someone, that our job is to create people who are vocationally trained, not liberated, who are ready to contribute to industry. I don't think higher education is to prepare people for industry only. I don't think that is the job of higher education. I'm very sorry to note it. There has been high degree of emphasis to create a robo. I don't think education is equal to learning from online classes. I can't equate the human being, a person who has emotions a person who has sociality is requires something more. So maybe that you have a blended learning situation where you utilize these resources to augment learning, but it can't replace human interaction which takes place. If you want to retain humanity on this earth, if you want to respect values, you need to nurture those values. Otherwise, there is no place for those values. The whole premise on which NEP is based, and the whole strategy that we are thinking, the two don't match. And if you have read NEP, it talks about creating a multidisciplinary higher education institution across India. In each district, there will be such a higher educational structure where multidisciplinary learning is available. I am sure that the vision that a technology will be there, no doubt about it. But how we are going to use it, I think there is a need to re-examine the whole issue. And unless we nurture this quality, I agree with you that the challenge of quality can be met only by introducing quality. There is no other way. So we have to create opportunities within the system and see that additional structures are created which facilitate quality. There is no other solution to that problem. And the problems are quite complex. I expected you to think about the structural change which has been proposed. I hope that you will reflect on that an adequate structure suitable for our Indian conditions, particularly the regulatory bodies they are thinking about, and the one which is with us, the existing ones, what kind of appropriate strategy will be fine. I will stop here and I express my gratitude to Shailendra and all of you. And I have enjoyed listening to you. I have learned many things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Misra. You have shown the mirror of the real education scenario, which is at the university level, state university level, colleges level, and things where means many of us have not even gone and thought of it. But let me just say that funds will be available to those institutions who can fend for themselves. Teacher salary will be guaranteed, but innovation, creativity, empathy, team skills, collaboration, that is expected from such kind of citizens who have the feeling for nation, who have the bonding for the nation, who have the empathy for the people. Creating that kind of people will definitely require the humanism, and we are not in the even at IIT and IIM, we are not in the business of creating robots. We are also creating human beings who are industry ready, who are getting that they are paying whatever is demanded from them. Definitely, the access and equity issue that you have raised is something which will be required, and that's why the commitment of government will be there. And as Professor Bhasker said, that 6% itself is not being actually utilized, and because of the kind of procedural hashes kept in GFR and other things, that whatever funds are given, that is not utilized. So it is said that if the autonomy is given to these institutions and the procedures are relaxed so that they can use whatever fund is allocated to them and good education can happen. We can debate the issue on long, but this has created some kind of spark in our mind, and we will think of it whether the regulating institutions that are proposed to be created and that are already there. What is the feasibility of these regulating institutions and whether how they can benefit or they can create further impediments? That is the matter of study, and we will do that. And there can be further series of discussion on this, in which people like you will be invited and will get more learning and more insight, and try to get the issues resolved to the extent possible, so that our education system, as Professor Tiwari said, education policy, new education policy can work as a panacea, can solve the critical problem which is plaguing the current education system. Now, over to Swati ji.
Thank you, sir. I once again thank all the eminent speakers for their such enriching inputs and discussions on the new education policy. This is time for our question answer round. For this, I would invite now Professor Anshuman Hazarika, sir, to kindly moderate the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Kindo. Thank you, Honorable Director, sir, and all the invited speakers, respected professors. I'm very delighted to moderate this question answer session for today's webinar. And I would like to request all interested participants who would like to ask questions to our esteemed panel to please type in their questions on the chat box and also keep their microphones on mute in the meantime. We have already a question from one of the staff members of IIM Ranchi, Mr. Chakraborty. He has raised the question regarding the recommendation of the NEP to make all higher educational institutions come under one umbrella, and he has said that will bringing all higher educational institutions under one umbrella not impact the name and fame of such institutions who are working in specialized disciplines such as technology, management, or science, or whether converting these institutions into the simple one umbrella of an university, will it affect their functioning altogether and ultimately defeat the entire goal? I'd like to start with Professor Bhasker and his opinion on this regard.
All right. Well, I also got to read his question on the chat box. So what he's asking is whether IIT, IIMs which are specialized, will they, by becoming a university like, lose their sheen? The fact remains that IIT education is already in the form what NEP wanted it to be. We are already aligned. I mean, IIMs are a slightly different issue. But IITs are already aligned, they're multidisciplinary. Only after 86 policy and to some extent 66 policy, to some degree they got a little more focused, because that time policy thought focus into certain technologies is more important. If you go back to the early policy education, we went under the older policy. The IIT Roorkee, or then University of Roorkee, 20% of our education in the first 2 years came only from liberal education. Even another 10 to 15% was what we call the hobbies, sports, and other development activities. So vast majority of, I'm not talking physics, chemistry, maths, and geosciences, and variety of other multidisciplinary things we did. We started from that. So IITs have this full-fledged multidisciplinary department. Only thing they might have to align that rather than admitting people into BTech in mechanical engineering, give them an option to decide that program of study after arriving there, etc. and so on. So with the minor changes here and there, IITs are already well placed. So is Indian Institute of Science and IISERs, etc. and so on. IIMs are very specialized. IIMs, agriculture universities, and legal universities, the national law universities, are three or maybe one or two more domains which have this challenge to become multidisciplinary, but that's a challenge which can be met. I would not like, I think my two colleagues are already there, so they can talk about their institute. They're already becoming multidisciplinary by variety of programs which they've launched, or from 2011, IIM Indore has a program, etc. and so on, and those dimensions can be further broadened. So I would stop there because there are other colleagues who can talk about those institutes in their sense. But IIMs can also become a multidisciplinary. It doesn't take away the sheen. Actually, it actually enables them to do broader and bigger things. Right?
Thank you, sir. I believe Professor Tiwari wanted to add something to the discussion.
Actually, first of all, let us understand what is multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary does not mean that in IIM there are no multidisciplines. Say, for example, how you cover the marketing, how you discuss the different aspects of accounting. So now what happens in any domain, there are infusion of many other areas influence. Correct. And if that you can ensure from all angles, like say in IIT Kharagpur, we started medical education also. So when we talked, there was a lot of laugh and people are saying that ये तो technology वाले कहाँ से health में आ गए. So but now you can see everywhere there are people, they are making ventilators, they are making different kind of PPEs, they are making different kind of equipment that are being used in the pandemic. So idea is, so initially when you talk, under concept of multidisciplinary idea, I am telling you one more thing. Nowadays, in social sciences area, one of the best papers are coming from the IIMs, IITs and related areas. And few universities, they are already there. Whereas if you see the department size of the universities, they are very big. But if you see the number of international contributions, they are coming from these so-called small bodies like IITs and IIMs. So idea is that it is the ecosystem that we are going to make with the multidisciplinary idea. Like say there will be humanities, there will be law, there will be legal framework, there will be business analysis, there will be mathematical analysis, computational analysis. They are also multidisciplinary, right? It is not like that just calling only 5 departments of one and they are multidisciplinary. In our system also, IIM itself by nature is multidisciplinary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor Hajarika, please enable your audio.
Professor Rai, would you like to add any comments to this discussion, since IIM Indore is already running the course successfully since 2011?
No, absolutely. And I completely concur with what Professor Tiwari said, that the multidisciplinary approach or the multifunctional approach is not merely about creating buildings.
Yeah.
Before creating buildings, you first have to create the mindsets, and that mindset still exists. So for example, let's say if I teach a course on leadership or I teach a course on negotiation, I try to draw from psychology, I try to draw from sociology, from anthropology, from communication, from behavioral sciences, from mathematics, so on and so forth, from the game theory, so on and so forth. And that itself is a multidisciplinary approach. And even when it comes to programs, I already gave you the example of the integrated program and management. We have recently signed an MOU with IIT Indore because we happen to be one of those unique cities which have both an IIM and an IT. And we are planning to launch programs which will draw both from engineering, quantitative methods, and the management sciences. But the whole point is that all of these programs already did exist in some or the other form. And we took inputs even while teaching courses. So this is nothing novel, but what it needs to have is a more open approach of the institution themselves, and more importantly, as I said, of the faculty themselves. So if the faculty are open to the idea of drawing from different areas. So for example, if I teach negotiation, I also draw a lot from philosophy. My PhD in negotiation was based on the analysis of Mahabharat, amongst other things. So I'm talking about that particular approach, and therefore I agree with what Professor Tiwari said, that it's only institutionalizing this particular approach of the mindset that would be required. Otherwise, this is not a big deal to achieve.
Thank you, Professor Rai. We have a next question, which I think will be the final question, and we'll have a round of discussion on this. It's a question by Mr. Abhinav Rathore, and I'd request Professor Misra to please deal with this question. He asks about the faculty crunch that you have already talked about in higher educational institutions. He says that there is also a crunch of teachers who have been taught in a different education system at the lower levels. And he says that there is already a crunch of teachers at all levels, and he asks for suggestions of what steps should be taken to bridge this gap, since there is a crunch at all levels altogether, sir.
Mr. You good. Mr. You
Yeah. The NAP has given some thought to it, and at lower level, a notion of school complex has been proposed, where faculty can move from one school to the other school. And in that way, the pool will be there, and the help from faculty can be availed. That is one proposal. The issue that we have is that we have expanded the system. We have created new institutions, and there are two kinds of problems. One is that because of certain regulations at a state level, there are problems in appointment, and it's a reality. For so many years, many institutions are not able to recruit. So I think these impediments have to be removed. We know that in Bihar and UP, very populous states, thousands and perhaps lakhs of teachers are not present in the class in primary schools and middle schools and higher secondary schools because of litigations. So I think on priority basis, these issues have to be sorted out. If we have to put system in order and you want to achieve quality, those measures are required. If teachers are not there, if we don't have faculty, this question has to be resolved in terms of augmenting the situation by creating such provisions. There is no other way. The government has to take care of this on priority basis. I don't think, either you close the institution, there is no need to open such institutions. And it's pathetic that now you create an office and ask someone to join as Vice-Chancellor and you start the university. Many universities have 1,000 colleges affiliated to them. So we have not paid attention to the quality in the higher education sector, and we have extended its laissez-faire. So we need to look into it very seriously, and government has to take care of this situation.
Thank you, sir. We would have to conclude the session at this time due to a slight shortage of time, but at the moment we have a very relevant question. Probably it deserves to be the final question of the session and of the webinar, and I would like to request the Honorable Director, sir, to deal with this question. We have a question from Mr. Subhadeep Sinha, who asks, sir, do you think the new education policy is better and promising than the existing one? So that, I think, deserves to be the final question of the webinar and probably the most crisp question of the day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I personally think a lot of mind has gone into it. More than a lakh representations and discussions have happened to generate this new national education policy. Definitely, it is much better than what we had in 1986 and revised version 1982. But let me just say how it is implemented in letter and spirit, that will make it whether actually it is better than that. So at policy level, we have never been bad. We have been doing good job. But at the implementation level, things goes haywire. So we have to be very, very careful while implementing. And 20 years span has been given to it is a long time, and by that time a generation will pass, and only the evaluation will happen whether it resulted in the desired outcome or it did not.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to request Professor Aditya Shankar Misra to present the vote of thanks for today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hazarika. Honorable speakers of today's webinar, Professor Vishwavidyalaya sir, Professor Himanshu Rai sir, Professor Bhasker sir, Professor Debashish Chatterjee sir, Professor Manoj sir, and Professor Shailendra Singh sir, and all the participants. It's my privilege to have been asked to present a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership, Policy and Governance and IIM Ranchi, extend most sincere thanks to the honorable speakers and participants who blessed us with their presence and took out valuable time from their busy schedule. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for today's speakers for their enlightening and insightful analysis of the topic. We are thankful to you for explaining the complexities of the NEP 2020 in such a simplistic manner. And I thank our Honorable Director, sir, to drastically, reduce my burden by summarizing the speaker's address. But whatever, the topics have been discussed, whatever arguments have been made, I would like to recite two Sanskrit slokas which can summarize the entire discussion. The first one is Pustakastha Tuja Vidya Parhastagatam Chodhanam Karya Kale Samutpanne No Sa Vidya No Tadhanam. So there is no education, utilized till it is being implemented, right? Second is Vidya Dadati Vinayam Vinya Dhyati Patratam Patratva Dhanat Dharma Tata Sukham. So directly from knowledge, we cannot have qualification. In between, we have values. In between, we have humilities. So I also wish to express my gratitude to our director, sir, for providing encouragement and support to the center, and most importantly, for inviting such a galaxy of speakers. I am very grateful. I am very grateful to my colleague, Professor Hazarika, center staff, Ms. Prachi, and secretary to the director, IIM Ranchi, Ms. Swati Kindo, for conducting this webinar. Last but not the least, I extend my thanks to our IT department for their support. Thank you everyone for making this webinar successful with your contribution. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Ladies and gentlemen, I once again thank you all for connecting with us. And with this, we conclude our webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.